Hi guys, it's Rapikuno and I'm back on YouTube. I haven't recorded in a while because COVID restrictions had eased in my country, but recently the lockdown's been more restrictive and so I have more time at home. Now the main idea behind today's video is dual spikes offense. And spikes hyper offense is a really weird concept if you think about it because it's really an oxymoron. What I mean is that spikes needs multiple switches to be effective, but hyper offense doesn't give you a lot of turns to effect that damage. So I was wondering, how do you get the most out of spikes with a limited number of turns? Actually, the answer is really simple. It's just lay 3 layers of spikes. But that's easier said than done because the typical hyper offense spikes team involves Smeargle leads, which can typically only lay 1 or 2 layers of spikes. But the 3 layers is just so much better because you actually do damage when you're forcing out the physical wall. You're not just making damage stick. So what do I mean? Say Swampert switches into Aerodactyl on turn 1. It takes damage, it heals up with lefties, that's 6.25%. Now Aerodactyl switches, Swampert attacks, it gains back another 6.25% of lefties, so 12.5%, okay? And then now Swampert uses Protect, it gains back another 6.25%, so that's 18.75%. And 2 spikes is only 17%. So actually, Swampert is able to heal off any damage, any spikes damage, just because it has leftovers and Protect. To really break that loop, you want to go more than 2 spikes, so 3 spikes. And that's why, if you look at hyper offense teams, that are physically based, like say Cowboy Dan and Aiden's team, I think they have something like Vaporeon here and Metagross in this slot. The Metagross is choice banded because it's made to lure in Swampert and exploit the fact that spikes helps the damage to stick. So those meshes really matter. The damage actually sticks on Swampert, right? But when you have 3 spikes, I think the name of the game kind of changes because every time you switch in your special threat and Swampert is forced out, it takes another 12.5% of damage, say, compared to 1 layer of spikes. So you can actually damage Swampert by forcing it out even if you're using a specially based Pokemon like Gengar or Offensive Swampert. So it's actually really interesting that you are providing chip on a physical wall with a special mon just because you have spikes. And that's not something that you can do otherwise with just 1 layer. So what you lack in physical pressure, you actually provide it with your special mons. Okay, so the second advantage to having 3 layers of spikes is that special walls actually kind of hurt Aerodactyl. What I mean is you don't want a 60% HP Blissey or Bowl Celebi or Wish Tag Rachi paralyzing or leech seeding arrow. These special walls are actually quite physically bulky, so it's actually important to chip them down into range too. Now, the third reason is that you actually make rock spam a lot more reliable. Now, rock spam meaning a combination of Tyranitar and Aerodactyl. And I actually did some calculations before I made this video to show why this idea is sound. Now, if you take a look at the damage that Dragon Dance Tyranitar does on Swampert, right? So it's actually about 33 to 39%, so that's 36% on average. And if you look over here, you see that suppose Tyranitar does a Dragon Dance while Swampert comes in with 3 spikes on the field. It took 18.75% damage, alright? So now Dragon Dance Tyranitar, after a boost, it does 36% on average. And after 2 rounds of lefties, it gets around 59.5% of damage, okay? With actually a relatively low variance. So if Swampert somehow guesses the Protects right, then that's 47%. And you can see it's really difficult to break Swampert. You fire off 2 plus 1 Earthquakes on it and it's only 47%. So that's where the spikes really helps to bring Swampert down. You get the 18.75% at first, and now you're sending in Gengar and offensive Swampert to, your own offensive Swampert, right, to force Pert out. And that's another 6.25% damage by the time it comes back in. So you see, the total amount of damage that it receives is 72% if you add everything up, and that's basically 28% of HP left. And this is the kind of HP that really puts Swampert in Aerodactyl's range. But you can imagine that if you only had one layer of spikes, then that 28% will simply be 40%. You just add another 12.5%. And this is out of the range of Aerodactyl. So having the third spike really does matter in giving you the ability to break through the bulky waters, Swampert specifically, in one less turn. And I think that matters. Okay. So now that I've given you my 3 reasons for using double spikes, if it were that simple, we would only need 4 mons, but your opponent isn't stupid, of course. They'll try to use Skarmory to wall, or they'll try to sack something to prevent Tyranitar from just setting up at full HP, like say, T-bolting T-Tar with Zap as it Dragon Dances. They will try to pressure you before you can even set all your spikes. So the rest of the team needs to be fine-tuned, and that's the tricky part. So I'll show you what I did wrong in my first approach, okay? Let's see. Right, so this was my first idea for our team. So I didn't think very clearly. I just wanted 2 offensive spikers, so I just slapped the Smeargle and Cloyster on. Okay, now spin blocking is necessary with 3 spikes. So I have Gengar over here, and a DDTar for physical side weakener, Arrow as a cleaner, choice band Aerodactyl. Now I didn't want to die completely to Zapdos while preserving my DDTar's HP. So if Cloyster's kind of weak to Zapdos, so I put Metagross there. It's at least less weak to Zapdos than Swampert. And I gave Metagross Endure because the pace of the pace of the team meant that there's high chances I want to keep Meta in and not continuously switch. And I also want an out against offensive Starmie and Duck Trio. Also, the newest Zap Duck craze uses both Duck Trio and defensive Pert, so it makes it really hard to break through physically. So it turns out that this was not a great idea. Okay, I'll tell you the issues, right? The first thing is that Cloyster just invites all sorts of really scary threats. Zapdos, Gengar, they switch into it, they one-hit KO or come close to that, and they just threaten everything on this team. So ideally, I like to sleep Zapdos T1 with Smeargle, but if they don't allow that, then it's very hard to switch in Gengar and waste it with an obvious boom, because that's what I'm going to do. If I see a Zapdos, I'm switching Gengar in, and now I have to guess, well, will Zapdos just simply stay there and absorb the boom? Probably not, right? Okay, so the other issue with Cloyster is that it's not very good against Skarmory. Toxic means that Cloyster is eventually losing, and it can't continuously spin hoping for only one layer to stay on my side. Because Gengar can choose, opposing Gengar can choose whatever turn that it wants to come in on. And although Cloyster acts theoretically as a PERT pivot to Metagross, I do not think it's that great because it's I usually end up just booming Cloyster before it actually acts as a reasonable PERT switch. Okay, the second issue with this team is Metagross. Now, I already covered the Zapdos weak on this team. And remember what I said about how DDTar is basically the most effective at targeting the water. It means that most of my turns are going to be used mashing down Skarmory, which isn't easy because Metagross just gets spiked on without leftovers. And if it gets roared out, say, to DDTar, then when DDTar gets down to, like, say, 75%, it's going to die to Hydro Pump really easily. That's really bad. Yet, if I use something like Choice Band Metagross over here, just like Aiden and Cowboy Dad, then it's better against Skarmory, but it's less robust against Starmie, Dugtrio. So I think I really have a dilemma over here. It still doesn't solve the lack of Swampert switch-in. Okay, the other issue I had with Metagross had to do with Gengar. So when I say Gengar, I don't mean the opposing Gengar, but my own Gengar. So look at this atrocious Gengar set that I had to use to support this team. The reasoning for this set was that if Gengar lures Blissey, then I don't want Metagross to be T-Wave. Since under full paralysis, I cannot loop Skarmory as effectively with Meteor Mashes, and it nullifies my Salak Berry. So that's why I have Taunt on Gengar to prevent Blissey from laying status, but Taunt takes away valuable move slots for Gengar in such an offensive team. And since I want Explosion to maintain the momentum, and I also want Giga Drain to force out Swampert, then I'm having a Gengar set that's already looking very bad. Furthermore, okay, if you look at this whole team, I'm really weak to DD Ments. So then I'm putting physically defensive bulk on Gengar, which means that I have a Gengar on an offensive team that doesn't really have offensive EVs. Look, I even made it Jolly over here. Like, that's not a good Gengar. Okay, so it basically means that with Metagross and needing Taunt on Gengar, I'm asking Gengar to do too much. Okay, finally, we have Choice Band Aerodactyl here, but I believe that Aerodactyl is fundamentally flawed because with the two spikers to be sacked, Smeargle and Cloyster, I'm playing 4v6. And if I somehow trade that to, say, 1v3, right? Now I need Aerodactyl to take out 3 mons. But even if 2 of them are complementarily resisting rock and ground, like, say, Zapdos plus Jirachi, then Aerodactyl just loses. Okay. Furthermore, if the last mon is an arrow, then I have to go for a 15-50 since Metagross is probably dead. Or if it's DD Mans, then I have to hope to flinch it down. Okay, so I've highlighted all these issues with my first version of this team, and I'd like to show you a much better version. Okay, so the first change that's made is that we have Glalie over Cloyster, and second, off-PERT over Metagross. Okay. The third thing is that we have a substitute arrow instead of choice band arrow, but I'll explain that later. Okay, so not only is Glalie not weak to Zapdos and Gengar, it can also pivot into them, so that's effectively 2 extra turns of dealing with Zapdos and Gengar. Now Glalie can't pressure Tyranitar as well, but once Tyranitar is boomed on, it's actually a good thing for Aerodactyl. Because Aerodactyl's Lychee boosted Earthquake isn't getting to bulky T-Tar even after 3 layers of spikes. So Taunt prevents Skarmory from setting up more layers or phasing Glalie. So that's one advantage compared to Cloyster also. You don't get DDTar or Smeargle unnecessarily chipped. I mean, it might sound strange that I care about Smeargle, but sometimes you can use Spikes plus Sand to get Smeargle into Salak for a last minute boom. Or you can lay an extra layer of spikes should you not finish setting up or get those spikes spun away. The other good thing that Taunt is for is that it stops Blissey from healing. So finally, I can't overstate how Ice Beam is such a good move with 3 layers of spikes, since it hits all the flying types, which are immune to spikes. Yeah, so overall Glalie is a really good fit together with Smeargle once you have those 3 layers of spikes down. The 2 things I want to talk about with respect to Glalie are dealing with Gengar and Celebi. Okay, so the first thing is that Gengar is one of the few flying mons that can beat Aerodactyl with a decent chance at full HP. So ideally, Gengar should be chipped. But let's say Gengar is in on Glalie, right? With 3 spikes, you can either force Gengar to stay in and take the chip, or if they switch to Blissey, then they get Blissey weakened or boom, and then how's the opponent going to deal with this team's Gengar? It's very likely that the best way for your opponent to deal with Gengar is to use their own Gengar. So the opponent's Gengar is going to get chipped either way. It's waiting to happen. Either Glalie forces it out now so that it gets chipped by Gengar later, or opposing Gengar just stays in and takes damage. Okay. The second thing I wanted to say about Celebi is about Celebi, which is that Glalie and Offpert actually divide the Celebi Blissey matchups quite well. So if you've played Advanced for long enough, you know that Ice is a very dangerous attacking type to non-Blissey teams. On the one hand, you have Pokemon like Starmie and Jinx that are super scary against teams using Celebi as their special check, which is why they usually carry a revenge killer like Aerodactyl or Dugtrio. But on the other hand, Ice Beam doesn't do anything to Bliss, so the good thing is that Blissey teams are usually weak to Offpert. So I like to use Glalie to pivot into Celebi, and maybe keep it around if I have to. So you tend to see Celebi coming in very quickly since it will come straight into Swampert or Gengar, which are the mid-game mons that will come in once Smeargle and Glalie do their job. So it's not like you will just boom Glalie necessarily without thinking twice first against those bulkier kinds of teams. Finally, the last good thing about Glalie is that it can be kept alive against Claydol teams. And it can 1v1 Claydol as an extra flexibility of play, so you don't really have to rely completely on Gengar for spin blocking. It helps that Glalie will be at high HP after Smear has done some spiking. So its HP can be preserved for dealing with Claydol. Now, because Glalie helps to take on the Celebi teams, using offensive Swampert over Metagross still lets me lure Skarmory, but this time with a much stronger Hydro Pump compared to Metagross Meteor Mash. And this also provides another switch into Swampert. So that with Gengar, so with Giga Drain Gengar and offensive Swampert, I now have 2 opportunities to switch into opposing Swampert. And I'm not as weak to Aerodactyl or DD-Mans, and I also hit Starmie with Step EQ. I deterred Claydol from switching in with Hydro. So all that's really good synergy. And remember what I said about Blissey coming in on Gengar and T-waving Metagross? So Swampert isn't going to suffer from any of that because, well, it takes some guts for Blissey to want to use Toxic on Gengar, and even if Swampert gets Toxic, well, that just means that it gets brought into Torrent range a bit faster. It's a bit less. It's a bit more frail, but it doesn't stop it from breaking. Unlike say, full paralysis on Metagross. Okay, of course, by not using Metagross over here, I lose another boom slot. But I don't really miss it because I personally think that the one-hit KO style boom with 3 spikes is not really synergistic. So what I mean is this. So think about the worst and the best case scenarios, right? In the worst case, Skarmory blocks the boom, and that's really bad, okay? Like in the best case, so in the worst case, Skarmory blocks the boom, that's really bad. In the best case, even if you land the boom on Pert, like that's quite anti-synergistic with 3 spikes, because it means you have to expend all the effort to set spikes to chip Pert, only to boom on it with Meta, which would have taken out Pert anyway without spikes. So the kind of booms that Spikes offense likes are those that are aided by spikes. So that's basically like a Gengar boom. Okay, Gengar booming into Cell or T-Tar. It doesn't one-hit KO them, but it really chips them down, especially with spikes. So that leaves the most common scenario, which is booming into resists like Metagross, Tyranitar, and Jirachi. Now, conventionally, Aerodactyl likes Metagross to boom on this stuff because EQ doesn't usually KO them after spikes. But I'll explain later that when we get to Aerodactyl, we don't even need that much damage booming into Metagross, T-Tar, or Rachi because of our Aero set, which provides a little bit of deception. Okay, furthermore, there's already going to be booms from Smear and Glalie, so I don't think we miss the boom on Metagross that much. The main issue that I see using Pert is that I'm weaker against Mixed Tyranitar, because no matter how much speed that I pump, and you've seen that I've maxed it out, right? Tyranitar is going to outspeed Swampert by just a little bit, and you'll have to pivot around Mixed Tyranitar in that case. Okay, so perhaps at this juncture I should explain the EVs. I'm running maximum speed Swampert, even going naive over here, right? And that's because there are so many situations where you just want to KO Metagross and T-Tar before they do any damage. Say, you lay 3 layers of spikes on a CB Meta, then you boom on it with Glalie, right? So CB Meta came in, took some spikes, now you boom on it, and now Metagross is at 50%. So you want to outspeed Metagross and KO it with EQ. And you can afford to do that because you don't need the extra power, from Rash if you're going to lay 3 spikes, I think. There's also DD Grass Tyranitar coming in on Gengar. You want to be able to boom and revenge with Swampert before Tyranitar grasses Pert. And why not a kind of Salak set? Well, the purpose of Swampert on this team is not to trade. It's to target some very specific Pokemon like Skarmory and opposing Swampert. So Swampert basically here wants all the longevity it can get to pivot in and continue battering them down. Not to mention you don't want this Swampert to lose to the scary Pokemon. Scary physical Pokemon. Okay, so As for the Glalie EVs, there are really no good answers. Actually, when I was laddering, I actually used max HP and the rest in special defense. Now you see, the speed here is something that I consider important because, well, outspeeding Claydol is useful. And a lot of Celebies are, lie in the 240, 244 plus range. Same thing with Tyranitar, its max speed is 243. So you want to be faster than those guys to exert pressure, especially with Boom. And also 253 means that I outspeed substitute Vaporeon, which is something that, once you pass substitute, get some DDs on their own Tyranitar, it can be very threatening for my team. Okay. So now, what about the defensive benchmarks, right? Like I said, Glalie is good for switching into Zapdos, but with these 80 stats, you're not going to have a lot of bulk. So it turns out that if you max HP and leave the rest in special defense, okay, then there's a 75% chance of getting 2-hit KO'd by Modest Zap. So what I kind of have to hope is that the Modest Zap will be tanked by Smeargle and put to sleep, or at least forced out, so that Glalie doesn't have to do the tanking later on. But Glalie can deal with Timid Zap just fine. So if you max special defense this way, okay, then yeah, you deal with Modest Zap quite well, but then you get 2-hit KO'd by Pert EQ half the time, and 3-hit KO'd by Peck Scarm 75% of the time after like 2 spikes, which is presumably when you want to send in Glalie after a spike war with Smeargle. So there are no good answers, to be honest. I think you can use whatever you want. Well, the good thing is that Smeargle already does some covering for opposing Zapdos, and Swampert covers opposing Swampert and Skarmory to some extent, so you're not that afraid. Okay, now on to the Gengar set. So I definitely want Explosion on this team to prevent DDTar setup, and as an additional way to remove the spiker, the spinner. I also need Giga Drain for Pert, as I mentioned earlier. I don't think it's too consequential whether or not it's Giga Drain or HP Grass. I just chose Giga Drain because I thought Pert will be so heavily chipped by spikes, and I'd rather get the recovery, which is also helpful against like physical T-Tar. So I need a move to hit Skarmory, and it's going to be Fire Punch of T-Bolt, but I think T-Bolt is much better here. Because one, it's stronger, so it really matters. You must remember that Drill Peck 2-hit KOs Gengar with these offensive EVs. The second thing is that it helps to spin block Starmie better. I mean, you don't want to use Giga Drain. You want to be able to put Starmie into a range where 2 switches under spikes will KO. Now, Gengar is expected to face Gengar 1v1 sometimes, as I explained earlier with Glalie. So you also want Thunderbolt to be able to help to solo these Gengars. And sometimes special defense Zap switches into Gato, so it's good to have Thunderbolt as some kind of mid-ground. In fact, you'll see that on this Gengar, this amount of special attack helps to 3-hit KO Gengar with certainty, with almost full certainty, almost. and that's really important. So I also added a little bit of speed creep over here. You know, most Gengars go up to like 333, I think, but I go a little bit higher because I'm expecting to face the Gengar mirror matchup quite a bit. Finally, I'm just going to I'm just going to say that we don't have to worry about Celebi too much because Glalie can switch in or we can explode on it. And, you know, so I'm not going to dedicate the last move slot. I'm not going to dedicate this move slot or the last move slot to using Fire Punch or Ice Punch. So what I really want to do now is that if I can convince Blissey not to be engaged in a soft boiled loop, then that makes it easy to make progress. And so I'm using Focus Punch in the last slot. And that also helps me to deal with Pursuit Tyranitar. Yeah, you know, Tyranitar is one of these things that people are very keen to sack because it's not really doing anything apart from taking out Gengar, and it doesn't really have that much defensive utility against, like, you know, DDTar or Choice Band Aerodactyl, especially if it lacks, say, Ice Beam or Counter. Yeah, so hitting Tyranitar and Blissey is kind of important, and so this is the final moveset that I've decided for Gengar. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so Tyranitar is Dragon Dance, and for now I've used a Lumberry, okay? And I've just maxed out the attack and the speed. So that's just standard Tyranitar, but that's because I'm laddering. And on ladder, I just want something consistent. You know, the key is that because this is a hyper offense, most people expect it to be a Lumberry and do not try to status T-Tar, especially if T-Tar takes spikes and no lefties is revealed. So I could technically go for another berry like Salak Berry, okay, or even Lychee Berry. But, you know, on ladder, there are just too many people who are willing to do silly things against Tyranitar. So I decided to keep the Lumberry for now. Jolly is the safest option because generally offense doesn't like dealing with Starmie, and Gengar can be used as an opportunity for setup. So it's good to outspeed Gengar and Starmie. But because very few people on the tour scene are willing to risk Starmie, I think you can get away with using Adamant, and it will be fine, you know, because by the time you reveal Adamant damage, you have already decided to sack the T-Tar, so Starmie can't come in to revenge kill. You know, though there could be some sharp plays that people can make, like sending Gengar in chip on chip Tyranitar's Earthquake. Well, I went with Jolly, and so far it worked fine for me. But you know, suppose you're using this for tours, right? You might want to use a Salak Berry here, and I think if we're still using bulkless Tyranitar, I don't think it's really necessary. But one good thing about using Salak, if you have bulky EVs, say like 184, let's see. So this survives Dark Trio, right? And something like Adamant, 200 speed, and the rest in attack. So you can use something like this. And with it's the idea that if Dugtrio tries to snipe Tyranitar after it kills something, then you can simply use the Starluck boost to get past Dugtrio. So that's one good thing about using Starluck Berry, and it all hinges on people, being scared to status a Tyranitar that doesn't reveal leftovers. So, because I'm really afraid of spinners on this team, I don't want to get spin block ever when I invest all that time into 2 spikers. I think Hidden Power Bug is a good idea, but if you're trying to be cheesy against someone who is not known for using spinners, then you can just use Endure, because Endure helps you to take on Dugtrio even after Spike's damage, or it also helps you to deal with Aerodactyl that tries to come in on a chip T-Tar to pivot into EQ and save their Pert, for example. Yeah, so there are many iterations for this Tyranitar, but for this team, on Ladder, I was specifically using this set, Hidden Power Bug, and I alternated between HP Bug and Double Edge, and I think both are basically fine. One of them gets you more damage on Pert, one of them gets you more damage on Claydol and Starmie without killing yourself. But then again, you don't expect Starmie, say, to come in like early against Tyranitar. So using Double Edge is actually also pretty fine over here too. All right, but let's just keep it Hidden Power Bug for now. Okay, so now Aerodactyl. Remember how I said that choice band Aerodactyl is fundamentally flawed because you're playing 4v6 down and there are not enough sacks or defensive backbone to back Aero up. So SubAero actually not only just solves the issue of changing moves if it's the last mon, but by saying it this way, I'm suggesting its best use is as the last mon, which is also not true. So the thing is, if you send Aerodactyl out mid-game, it actually fools people into giving you an extra turn. On this team specifically. So here's what I mean. So when you see an arrow mid-game, you're assuming that this is choice banded. And since Smeargle has slapped a mon, presumably T-Tar, it's highly likely that they'll try to sleep sack that mon so that they can get their check in safely. So you exploit that sack turn by subbing on the switch, and you can imagine you sub as they go to a slap T-Tar, now you KO the T-Tar, and you have a free sub behind which you can hit any super effective move that you want. So not only do you get the switch moves at the end, but you also fool your opponent mid-game. And not only that, remember I said how the Metagross version of this team is going to experience like huge Aerodactyl issues, the previous version I mean. Well, the thing is, if you can get a substitute on a sack that your opponent wants to effect in order to bring in their own Aerodactyl, right? Now, when you get a sub, you're protected from your opponent's Aerodactyl. So it's actually more robust than just a 50-50 against those kinds of teams, and that's what Substitute is really good for. Substitute plus Lychee Berry over here. Now on Ladder, I used Hidden Power Flying as the last move. Particularly there are quite a number of Flygons here and there, and I didn't feel like I really needed Bug because there are more non-spinner ladder teams than spinner ladder teams. I've certainly beaten some spin teams with HP flying before. I don't think it's that big of an issue because if you face Starmie, they want to switch out anyway. After, especially since you have laid 3 spikes. So as long as you fool them once, they have taken the spikes damage, they won't really be able to come in another time so easily. Okay, so finally back to Smeargle. So sometimes you will see Thunder Wave or WoW in the last slot, but that's because most people find that the second spike isn't that worth it. Now, we're different here because we need the second spike for the third spike that's followed on with Glalie. So there's no time to use any status move over here. So I'm using Substitute, right, to help with prediction against Aerodactyl and CB Mens, and also to help me to get into Salak Berry range against Calm Zapdos. It also protects Smeargle against early wakes for people who decide to just keep their Slapmon in, and also helps to protect Smeargle against people who try to dug it on T2. Okay, so just to review the whole team, I have Smeargle, alright, the EVs, yes, it's EV to mostly survive Zap while outspeeding lead Vaporeon. So that's, with also enough speed to outspeed Dark Trio after Salak Boost, right? So it's Smeargle with Substitute in the filler slot, Glalie with Taunt, where the EVs can be distributed between HP and special defense any way you want. I have a naive Offbird over here. I have a 4-attack Gengar with Focus, Giga Drain, Thunderbolt as coverage, and EVs that help to 1v1 opposing sp.def Gengar. DDTar, which I made jolly for the sake of ladder. So again, the EVs are actually they're actually just 252, 252. That's the version that I used on ladder, but you could also use a bulkier version that survives Dark Trio. And finally, Aerodactyl with Substitute and Lychee Berry. And here, there's a little technical point where you could either give it 300 HP or 301 HP. I think it doesn't really matter. It's basically, if you have to use sub for another time, that makes you susceptible to getting roared out, or it gives your opponent another turn of leftovers recovery. But in return, you get to sub another time, say against Drill Pack Skarmory. It might be important. Well, I don't really know. It hasn't really affected my gains thus far. But yeah, so that's the team. And now I will go on to show you some replays. Okay, so this is a game where I have this double spikes team against mixed offense. And you can see how once I've laid all my 3 spikes with the aid of sleep, the whole team just fell apart. Okay, so again, it's a Smeargle against lead Zap. And Zap doesn't KO Smear. So I actually want to save Smeargle because later on, if there's sand or spikes on my side, I can use it to activate Smeargle's Salak Berry. Alright, so now I pivot into Glalie, through Swampert. Yay, that worked. Okay, so now I laid my second spike and Metagross comes in. And I decide that, well, I don't want Metagross to be booming on any of my stuff. Like, I know that with enough spikes, I can actually chip Metagross to the extent where I can outspeed and KO it with any other mon on my team. So that's all I really have to do. Okay. And so I explode Glalie, well, and now I take the opportunity to lay a Spore, right, get my final Spike. Okay, so now that's great. And now I just explode, and now it's basically completely winning because you know, my opponent has no sturdy water type resist. So Lex just booms into Gengar. You know, with 3 spikes now, there's nothing that Tyranitar can do to stop Gengar from KOing it. Yeah, so even though it's the pursuit set, yeah, that's not helpful at all. Alright, so having activated the Lumberry due to full paralysis, I didn't want to dance in case of T-Wave. So I just slide it down, but you know, the thing about these mixed offense teams is that once their backbone is gone, the backbone meaning like Suicune plus Metagross in this case, it's just impossible to stop Aerodactyl. You see, what he tries to do here is he tries to encourage me to slide so that he can sack T-Tar along, but I just make use of this sack turn to sub, and now there's no way for him to avoid getting super effective attacks on the rest of his team. Okay, so Zap dies. Yeah, okay. Yep, so it's a pretty easy game against this mixed offense team. Alright, so in this game, I want to showcase not so much the dual spikes because I don't end up pulling it off. In fact, this is one of the first few games that I played with this team where I didn't know the sequences very well. But it really showcased what Substitute Aerodactyl can do in these kinds of teams where I'm basically behind because I sacked 2 spikers. And without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so I'm facing a lead Scum with Smeargle, and obviously I Spore. And okay, over here, I think from what I've learned, the best thing to do is to just straight up spike, but I was kind of expecting him to go back to Scarm and I wanted to get a lead on that. So I switched to Glalie, but my opponent revealed Aerodactyl. Okay, so here kind of making a read, I just go to Swampert, alright, and take a critical hit. Okay, so up till here I'm pretty much behind, right? And I need to get that spike off desperately. So I go back to Glalie, and my opponent goes to Gengar, presumably to like catch the Smeargle or something. And great, so now I get the opportunity to lay my first spike, assuming my opponent isn't a taunt Gengar. Well, I end up getting crit, so I only lay 1 layer, which is unfortunate. Right, and so, but I kind of decided, okay, I'm going for it. I'm going to start breaking, otherwise I'll never get anywhere. I mean, the other good thing also is that if say I end up luring what was a Swampert behind, I could continue pressuring with my own Swampert, right? So it's not a bad move to get Tyranitar in after Glalie died. Okay. So surprisingly, my opponent pivots from Metagross to Aerodactyl, which makes me think, Well, why would you do that? You only do that if you have HP fighting, right? Otherwise, you would just smash. So I make the switch to Gengar. Get the prediction right, and with Focus Punch, I take out Blissey. And thanks to all the attack investment, I don't even have to think about what to do next. Okay, so now that Metagross is here, I think I will still want Gengar to deal with Gengar, so I just sack Smeargle and take it that I won't be laying any more spikes for the rest of the game. And here I was kind of expecting to outspeed Swampert, outspeed Metagross. It's not common that you see really fast Metagross, faster than my 240 Pert. But because my opponent's Metagross is so fast, it has no bulk and Hydro Pump KOs. Right. Okay. So here, all I wanted was to get some chip on Gengar so that my arrow can start cranking, or rather DDTar first, then arrow, right? So here you can see that the speed on my Gengar, in order to face this mirror matchup, really helps. I T-Bolt and I get the lucky crit, which I think was not really necessary, but well, always helps. Okay, so now I should be winning. You know, T-Tar is sleeping. The only thing that can pressure me is Aerodactyl, and it was locked into Rock Slide. But unfortunately, I get flinched, and now I have to think about what I want to do. Okay. So obviously, DDing is the move here. And this is where it starts to get really interesting. Okay, so if you take a look at this position, my opponent has the odds to just ram through my entire team with arrow, especially since my off-put is only at 29%. Rock Slide is just gonna take everything down. So it's you know, on the surface it looks like it's a 50-50. But because of my sub-arrow, I decided to make a bunch of maneuvers where I go ahead and sack Pert and T-Tar. So you will see that I try my best not to KO Skarm actually. I'm just sitting over there and trying my best to bring its HP down without actually killing it. So I switch around a bunch of times. I guess kind of confusing my opponent as to what my intentions really are. Okay, and this is the time where I can start to perform the double sack because Pert is in Spike's range and T-Tar is in Spike's range. So T-Tar is gone, Pert is gone. Yep, and now arrow is left. Okay, so kind of hinging on my opponent not knowing that I'm sub. But even if my opponent knows that I'm sub, you can't really do anything about it because Tyranitar is slapped, right? And it's slapped with 0 turns. So T-Tar still has to take on like 2 Earthquakes. So you can see over here that by summing, I have protected myself against arrow. So I can just sit on Skarmory all day. Yeah, okay, so Skarmory dies. And now T-Tar has experienced 0 turns of sleep. So I just need to EQ it down. It's definitely not waking up on the first turn. There's only a slight chance that it wakes up on the second turn. But that doesn't even matter anyway. So yeah, an interesting game, and you know, the sub really came in clutch over here, prevented me from having to go through these 50-50s. So this is a game that has been narrated by McMegan in his Advanced Cast number 2, which I'll link in my video description below. This game pretty much has most of the things that I want to showcase with this team, so that's why I'm showcasing it. So with Smeargle against lead Zap, I tend to spike maybe like 80% of the time, and that's because there's always a possibility that the Zap is a lead substitute Zapdos, and those can screw over Smeargle really badly. So you know, I get it knocked into solid range anyway, Spore Gengar, which is kind of interesting. And now, because the purpose of this team is really to lay all the spikes, right? That's exactly what I do. I don't really care about booming. Alright, so I sent in Gengar, and I think actually maybe sending in Swampert might have been a better idea, but I thought I could try to catch Blissey on the switch since I don't get that many opportunities to use Focus Punch. Well, it kind of failed. And so now I'm expecting my opponent perhaps to switch to his Special Wall, which I could then try to double to Glalie to catch. And that's what I do, but surprisingly he doesn't do anything but wait for Gengar to wake up, which I think is not bad of an idea actually. Yeah, okay, so now the Blissey comes in. And anyone who has played enough Advance, even if you have not really seen Glalie in action, would kind of know that Glalie has Taunt. So here I was expecting to go a little bit aggressive to take to gain momentum on the DDTar that switches in on maybe an expected Taunt. So that's why I get Swampert in, but my opponent goes straight back to Gengar and is doing a good job at just getting Gengar to wake up. Right, so now I don't feel like I'm particularly ahead. In fact, because my opponent has a Zapdos and now Glalie is burned, I think my opponent has kind of the advantage here. And to be honest, I don't think that Glalie is going to survive 2 hits of Zapdos anyway, which is why it's needed for me to pivot in, right? Because if I can't pivot it in, then it's just better for me to send in like Tyranitar or Gengar to boom later on. So here I just straight up boom Blissey, okay? And I send in Tyranitar to mitigate the Zapdos weakness. And now my opponent has Gengar, which is a great opportunity for me to just weaken Swampert. And remember I was doing all those Swampert calcs? Well, it turns out that my opponent is less defensively invested than I expected, so it's actually a good thing. I put Swampert into Gengar's Giga Drain range now. So now Swampert can't stop Aerodactyl at all, it's up to Tyranitar. And over here, because well, I have the speed creep on Gengar as I mentioned earlier, so it ends up being really useful in this Gengar Mirror matchup once again. And so now I KO Gengar, and my opponent sends in Skarmory last. It's not what you really expect as a last usually, but on this kind of team, it's just a TSS, so nothing surprising. And remember what I said about how T-Bolt is really the move here because Fire Punch is just too weak, especially when Skarmory is going to 2-8 KO with Drill Peck. Okay, so here I just send I send Swampert in to break Skarmory. And with this Zapdos left, I know that this Zapdos has a high chance of KOing my Pert, so I'm just going to get Arrow in, and I'm highly expecting this Zapdos to be Roar, so my intent was kind of to sub down to not to Lychee range, but just sub once and catch it on the Roar with Rock Slide. But it turned out that the crit just activated Lychee, so I didn't have much to think about. So I just slide it and T-Tar, you know, it survives the EQ, but because I have really fast pert, that's no matter. I just KO it anyway. Yeah, so it's a game that I definitely could have lost if say I got the worst of those interactions between Zap and Arrow. But I think overall, if I had not let Gengar gain momentum that early on, maybe by playing a little safer, that could have been, then I could have protected Glalie a little bit more easily, and saved it for Zapdos. Overall, it was a pretty fun game. Okay, I'm featuring this game not because I think my opponent's team is like really standard or good or whatever, but I feel like it features what I want to show about triple spikes breaking Swampert, and also the combination of Smeargle and Glalie laying those spikes. So let's see how it goes. Okay, so great, I'm faster, I spore the Metagross. And I'm not expecting Tonga to come together with Metagross, so I just sub, right? It's a very safe substitute. And so I get the spike. But I get the feeling that my opponent might be using a CB Mence. And I don't really have a good switch into that. So I'm just going to sack Smeargle here since I've already spored. Okay, so I was expecting my opponent to switch to, say, a special wall which I can just spike on, but my opponent goes back to Metagross, which I understand because he probably feels that the slap Pokemon is going to die anyway against an offensive spikes team. So, but the good thing is that because I slapped Metagross, now I can exploit those sleep turns to lay some more spikes and hopefully get all three down, which I do. Okay, so now I explode the Metagross. And I'm kind of happy about that because once I've laid down the 3 spikes, given what I think my opponent's team is, I probably don't need to keep Glalie anymore. And now with 3 spikes, I don't think Metagross, even if it wakes up, gets the opportunity to boom. So I think my opponent recognizes that and just sacks Metagross anyway. I miss a Hydro here, which is unfortunately, but I have to make the best of my situation because misses are going to happen all the time anyway. So, yep, I do my best to chip Pert, but I kind of want Pert alive because he probably has more physical threats at the back given how it's like a Metagross and a physical Salamence. Okay. So I pivot in on the expected Protect, catch the Aerodactyl with T-Bolt. Alright, so now looking at the Pert, seeing that 60%, I'm somewhat more confident about taking it down with Tyranitar and Spikes, so get it in and DD anyway. Now, I see a Skarm at this point, which is completely unexpected. It's looking like a rather physically offensive team here. So I'm not really sure what I was expecting, but certainly not a Skarm, like maybe a Celebi or a Snorlax or something. Okay, so Skarmory roars me out, but I know that I'm not as afraid about Skarm because I have sub on Arrow, So I sent Put back in to break Scarm. I'm not sure what this was about. Maybe my opponent also recognizes that he needs Scum to face Arrow, but not a sub-Arrow. So here I feel like I need to be a little aggro to get Put back in to break Put again. So that's why I switch Arrow in. And I kind of guessed that he wouldn't Rock Slide because that just lets DDTar set up a bit easily. It's great, so now I get the chip on Scarm. Which means that I won't be pegged to death as I slide it down. And you can see that even though Put started off at 60, now it's switched in with these spikes. And all I need to do is to force it out once again, which I do with DDTar. Right? And now, Arrow comes in. I can do whatever I want, actually. So the thing is, as long as I just keep attacking, Salamence is going to get hurt, despite how much it's intimidating Arrow. So I finish it off with Sub and Rock Slide. So even though my opponent's team is really funky, I think it was a really interesting showcase of what this team can do. Alright, finally this is a game that I wanted to show because I think it's really exciting, and it's against one of my friends, so I can guarantee you that the quality of the game will be good. And I kind of get into a nasty situation only to get to find some ways back into the game, and I like to show you how it goes, right? Okay. So again, Zap lead, but this time I have no idea what EVs this Zapdos has. Maybe it's like a timid with a low roll, so it just leaves Smeargle shy of gaining momentum on Zap, which unfortunately is really not in my favor because now I have to switch into Zap. And knowing that my opponent is good, I'm not going to risk stuff like hidden power grass on the switch, so I just let Glalie tank the T-Bolt. But I think now, because I'm using these max HP and like partially invested special defense EVs on Glalie, and I think that's kind of not as optimal as the one with max special defense. So I kind of get near a max roll on Glalie for this turn. So by now you can imagine I'm really panicking, but I kind of expected that, because this is looking like a max roll, my next shot, then I'll survive the next shot, which I do. And so Zap is gone, and now I get DDTar in. So okay, I get a spike, and I am safe from being completely wrecked by Zapdos. So this was a learning lesson for me on, improving Glalie's EVs. Okay, so now the question is, do I want to break Pert straight away? And I think the answer is no. I mean, the thing that I first noticed was that Pert wasn't carrying leftovers, which means that it's an offensive Pert, right? And I don't want to just get, it's an offensive Endeavor Pert, and I don't just want to get KO'd by Pert for no reason, given that I have other pivots. So I go to Gengar first. Okay, take the extremely powerful Surf, and I don't think my opponent is going to risk Pert when he has just revealed like one Mon. Okay, so I can safely do whatever I want, and I catch a Smeargle. Nice, interesting Smeargle mirror. Okay, so remember what I said about the Gengar mirror once again? So I'm happy to outspeed the Gengar to get the chip for arrow. And now, because I was not activated into Salad range on T1, I get Smeargle in a very threatening position where I can Spore, lay more spikes, and here I think I got kind of greedy because I could probably win the game with just an explosion and follow up on Swampert. But I didn't do the calcs, and I thought maybe if I got the third spike, I would be able to break Pert with DDTar. So yeah, I just spiked, assuming that I could KO with Pert after the explosion. But that was not meant to be because I missed Hydro. Okay, so now I have to think, right? My opponent is good. He kind of knows my team, and I feel like Arrow would be a pretty obvious pivot over here. So I don't go straight to Arrow. I decided that okay, it's still possible for me to win this game with some with some deception at hand. So I just let Pert get sacked. Okay, and now I send in Arrow. But you know what? What's the obvious thing you do over here? You have what looks like a DDTar. You have an Arrow, and you know it's very possible that you know once once my opponent sacks his Gengar, right, which is asleep, like Gengar is kind of useless, then you know it's no longer like set up fodder for Tyranitar, so like why not? Okay, but I surprised my opponent with Substitute, so now that means that I've reversed the momentum, and now Arrow can just do whatever it wants. Right, so this is the whole thing I was saying about how if you can convince your opponent to sack their Slapmon, sub-Arrow can just be devastating. Alright, so Gengar remains asleep, good for me. And Jirachi comes in. Okay. So now what I want to do here is that you see if I simply just EQ, or even if I sub down to Lychee range and EQ, there's no way I'm beating Pert. I'm just bringing it into I'm just bringing it into Salad range, and it will just one hit KO my DDTar. So that means it's at most of flinching chances for me to get past Pert over here. So what I do is I convince my opponent that I'm going to sub down into Lychee range when that's not my plan. So I sub once, and then I immediately go to DDTar. Alright, so now DDTar comes into play. I get to boost. Alright, so Jirachi goes away. And even though I don't get to KO Pert, I basically outspeed with Arrow, and I managed to turn what was a horrifying first 3 turns into something that resulted in a win with a 1 HP Arrow. Yeah, so I think these games really show how the combination of sleep spikes and sub arrow basically it just does wonders together. Okay, so I'll quickly go through my ladder run to the top. Okay, first some weird Ninjask team, and interesting Glalie mirror. Alright, and this is the mixed offense matchup. It's a Superman matchup. Alright. I played this really close game with this guy using Arrow plus Skyra. So I sort of set everything up as if it was a CB arrow, but it was a sub arrow. So it ended up being a 50-50 with my own sub arrow. Kind of interesting. Alright, this is the strange physical offense Scarm team that I showed you guys earlier. This is a game that HClad streamed. Yeah, it was a very close game. Okay, some ninja stuff. Yeah, more ninja stuff. Right, airports. Mainly, he got his sequence slapped and everything just rammed through the team. It's a game against Blue's Energy. And another. Okay. DDTar+SubAero. Facing some dual spinner, dual spikes team. Yep, this is a game I featured earlier. Well, in this game against KL, I end up tying, so I didn't lose too much elo from that. Yep, this is the Noi2 Mac offense, I believe, again. And it's a spinner Flygon team. Alright, so I think with this I get to 1700. Yeah, I get to 1700. So now I can show you the ladder screen. And here it is. Smeargle plus Glalie making it to 1700 and topping the ladder. I think I got kind of lucky along the way. Made some good reads and had some good fortune. But I guess it kind of shows that this double spikes idea isn't too shabby at all. Especially with Glalie helping to do some early game pivoting that stuff like Cloyster can't do. Yeah, so I hope you like this video. Leave your comments and I hope to see you next time.